This is the second interview that I get to have with this incredible guy right here, Professor Thomas Dolby. And I want to encourage everybody watching right now to go back and listen, because it's audio only, to our first interview, because I re-listened to this interview with you. And there's so many incredible stories and facts that you all don't know about him. So you can go to Podbean, Stitcher, iTunes, Backstage Pass with Meredith Marks, scroll down, and it's the Thomas Dolby interview from 2017. Hi, it's been
Hello
a
there.
while.
It's been the longest time, Meredith. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too. There's so much that's been going on that's happened in the past 7 years since I've last seen you, besides a pandemic. But now that we're out of all of that, this Totally Tubular Tour, I'm jumping in right off the bat with this one, because when I saw that come across social media, I thought, wow, this is something I think that's so beyond awesome. The lineup is incredible, but I really feel like this type of lineup is needed now, because there's so many great shows on the radio that are, going back to new wave and 80s music, and people want to see it. People want to be able to see these bands that you normally wouldn't get to see. So tell me a little bit about how you came up with creating this Totally Tubular Tour.
Yeah, I mean, I can't take credit for creating it. That would be down to a guy called John Pleater, who is an agent and promoter. And he approached me, I think, at the end of 23 and said he was putting something together. It didn't have a name yet. It didn't have a lineup yet. He said, I'm going to make sure that it is a really great lineup of authentic 80s acts. We're going to steer clear of people that feel like they're sort of semi-tribute bands, with like one original member or something like that. And we're going to make sure that we come up with a show that is sort of greater than the sum of the parts. And at that point in time, the headliner was supposed to be the Human League. And it
Mm.
turned out that one of the ladies in the Human League gets claustrophobic on tour buses. And so they fell by the wayside. And John asked me if I would close the show. And that was a big honor. And the reason that he gave was he said, you are authentic. You never split up. Uh, you never had artistic differences. You are the real thing. And unlike some of my 80s contemporaries, I haven't been touring sort of year in, year out because I've been busy with other things, as you know. So the
Mhm.
sense was that this is something, really special, that we'd be sort of the aristocrats of 80s music. And so, yeah, it all made sense. And I signed up. And at that stage, I think he was talking about 10 or 12 shows, and it's now turned into, I don't know, 25 in the US and North America. So it's going to be a very exciting tour.
So yeah, it's a North American tour that's going from June to August, and then you hit Europe, which is pretty exciting. So you've got, of course, Thomas Dolby, you, Thompson Twins, Tom Bailey, Wang Chung, Men Without Hats, The Romantics, Bow Wow Wow, and the Plimsolls. What a lineup.
It's a
That
very,
is going to be so much fun.
a very cool lineup. And if you think of the combination of all of the hit records that we had between us, it's going to be a really star-studded show.
Now, remember back to when we talked in 2017, I said the way that my brain works is I just imagine that all of you guys from the UK were all friends back in the day. And that's not the case, but you do have history with Tom Bailey. And I think, don't you have history with Wang Chung as well?
Not really Wang Chung. No,
No, okay.
Modern English, I think, toured with me in like 83 or something like that. We have some friends in, a lot of us have sort of people in common, friends in common. Tom Bailey, I went to see the Thompson Twins a lot in the early days when there were nine of them, one of whom was my friend Matthew Seligman, who was bass player for me for a while. And uh, Tom actually shared a squat in Brixton with one of my best friends, which was kind of amusing. Maybe it was a housing maybe squat was not fair, but yeah, so there's a lot of history there. Are we all friends? Well, we're friends now. I mean, when we do shows together now, it's just like an absolute bromance backstage, um, because there's just so many good memories and people have mellowed. Back in the day, we were quite competitive. In the UK, you were competing so hard to get on Top of the Pops, to get on Radio One, and there are only so many slots. And some bands were more successful in the UK. People were obviously vying to have hits in America, which is a bigger market. So there was a definite sort of frenemy thing going on back in those days. But these days, all the hatchets are buried, and we have a great time together.
Is there somebody on this tour, a band that you've never connected with, that you don't know, that you're really excited to share a stage with?
I talked to Annabella Lewin of Bow Wow Wow the other day,
Mhm.
which is very charming. She was like 15 or something, in my memory. She's now a, lovely middle-aged woman. And she's got a story or two to tell about the Malcolm McLaren days and Adam and the Ants and all of those kinds of things. So I'm very interested to see them. Plimsolls, the Romantics, I don't think I've ever crossed paths with in the past. Men Without Hats, maybe one or two festivals, but just a passing hello.
It is going to be an incredible tour. I'm so glad that you're out there. I'm so glad that you're taking the stage again because I think that people are really going to enjoy. I have not seen you on stage, and I really want to come to the DC Anthem show because I think that's going to be a great place to see you guys.
Yeah, that's a great venue. Now I've seen New Order there and OMD, and I played there with Berlin a couple of years ago.
Oh yeah.
So I know that's a great venue, great sound and view, and very user friendly venue, and a nice place to wander around in the afternoon. So yeah, really looking forward to that one. And it's the closest thing to my hometown of Baltimore.
Sure.
So a bunch of friends from here will be going down there. Unfortunately, we couldn't pull one off in Baltimore. I was really hoping to do that. Pier 5 or whatever was not available on the days that we needed it. So, if you're in Baltimore or anywhere in the DMV, come down to the DC Anthem and see that gig. That's on, I think, the 14th of July.
July 14th. It's going to be at the Anthem. Doors open at 4:30, and you can get your tickets online if you go to the Anthem, or you can look up Totally Tubular Tour because I know I'll be there. I'm going to be excited to see that. So something that we didn't talk about last time, this
Uh,
little gem right here, the
yeah.
speed of sound, breaking the barriers between music and technology, something about you that people might not know. You are an incredible storyteller. And not only just when I interview you, but like when we had dinner together, just listening to you talk about, you know, your time with Roger Daltrey and just different stories that you have to tell.
Roger Waters, please.
Oh, Roger Waters. I'm sorry. Yes, Roger Waters. My
Big difference.
bad. Big difference. But reading your stories, I I guess maybe if somebody doesn't know you, they're still going to find it fascinating. But I could literally hear you telling the stories. Um, Reading this book after I had spoken to you a few times. I could literally just hear your voice and the way that you tell the story. It's incredible. So um, you go through so many different stories, and I just wanted to bring up a couple of things from this book that stood out to me. One of which was um, uh, how you met Michael Jackson and some of the time that you had with Michael Jackson and how you complimented him on Billie Jean. And he complimented you on She Blinded Me with Science and said that it was getting some play on urban radio and in dance clubs in the US, along with the B side, One of Our Submarines. But he assumed that you were a black guy.
He thought I was American. I'm not sure if he had any conclusions about the color, but I think in those days it was relatively rare for music to cross over. I mean, it did
Yeah.
happen. And it was the beginning of the blend of, Africa Bambaataa was using Kraftwerk samples and, the stuff Michael was doing started to get play on MTV for the first time. So it was the beginning of a sort of a slow gel during the course of the 80s between what had previously been very separated as sort of, rock radio versus urban radio.
Right. And more into the book when you were explaining about going to his house. It's funny, I just watched the documentary of We Are the World
Mhm.
and watching Lionel Richie tell his story of going to Michael's house. And then I go, oh, wait, I remember that Thomas went to his house. So I had to go back and I had to bring up some stuff. And it was just really interesting how you ended up going to his house. And Lionel said that the animals were out. And I'm just curious, were the animals out when when you visited his house?
No, the animals weren't around. They were either, in their stalls for the night, or they'd escaped. Actually, a good friend of mine, Mary Collar, was Michael's personal assistant for a few years, and she was forever getting calls in the middle of the night saying, "Bubbles, the chimp has escaped. He's somewhere in the grounds," and she had to, or the llamas had got out, or whatever. She was always going. I mean, I have to preface anything I say about Michael just by saying, I had a great time with him. He was really sweet, very kind, very musical, a really caring artist. I saw some strange stuff at his house, but I never
Mm-hmm.
saw anything remotely sinister. So I take it with a grain of salt. And I'm certainly not going to come down on the side of people who are sort of looking for ways to scandalize, his memory.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
it was a very strange set of circumstances because I met him just on the cusp of going from superstardom to sort of global megastardom, the phenomenon that he became. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, I mean, even what Taylor Swift is doing now, I don't know if you can run the stats, but I mean, Michael was just such a household name at that point, just on everybody's lips. Um, but I met him just before that, and he was still at a point in his life where he was able to spend an evening talking about production techniques and different keyboards that I used. He was really keen to figure out some of my studio tricks. And we talked also about our lives, and in an odd way, we found common ground because he was on the road for a lot of his childhood. He felt that LA, California was somewhat removed from reality, and he liked the fact that he went to Middle America or the East Coast. It just felt more real. You could feel the seasons changing. People were sort of more down to earth, and he realized that California was a bubble really for him. And both of us had fathers that were, very big in our loomed very big in our lives for different reasons. Obviously, a lot's been written about Mr. Jackson. My dad was an archaeologist who traveled around the Mediterranean, and I did some traveling with him and got a very unique outlook on life from my dad. So we found a lot of common ground and had an entertaining evening. Yeah.
It's amazing. And not only were you talking about your stories with different people throughout your career in this book, but you really dive into the technology side, which I think is very interesting. And I like how you put at the end that people recall things differently, and you made the decision to tell it just as you remember it and apologize later. So it's listen, I'm one of those people where if I try to remember way back, I might be thinking of things that maybe it didn't happen the way that it seemed, but it seemed that way to me. So I love that you put that in your book and you sifted through yellow pads and notebooks and floppy disks and filofaxes and Palm Pilots and went through all of this stuff to create something to put out there for people to read and hear these stories. And whether they're, 100% true to form or somewhat, from how you recall it, they're still incredible, wonderful stories. So kudos on this book. And I highly encourage everybody to get this and read it. It's a great read.
Well, thanks very much. I mean, the first thing you do when you complete a manuscript is you send it to all your friends, to get their approval. And the first thing they do is they want to fix themselves in your book, because they remember things differently. And some of them would also go, look, I'm never going to get the chance to write a best-selling memoir and tell my version of the story. So you better get it right in your version. I've had people say,
Yeah.
"Come on, man, I was there. I was there that night. That's not the way it went down." So we have very selective memories, and this is borne out, in court cases where witnesses under oath tell a completely different story from what the factual evidence actually presents, and they believe it 100%. So we have this ability to brainwash ourselves into making something real when in fact it may be just a small slice of what really happened.
True.
So I mean, it was a great experience, and overall, these were stories that I told verbally many times before. So when I put pen to paper, as it were, it was like, just writing down the story the way that I'd told it verbally many times. It got me interested, though, in writing, in the art of writing. And I'm always looking for the new thing, Meredith. It's like I'm always looking for a new medium in which I'm kind of floundering, where I don't really know what I'm doing. And it involves learning new skills, learning to use new tools. And it forces me to dig deep in my creativity. And so I got the writing bug, and since then, during the pandemic, I actually started a novel. And I'm sure a lot of people started novels during the pandemic that sort of, never got completed. But I've actually
Right.
completed mine, and it's coming out this summer. And it's going to be launched on the first date of the Totally Tubular Tour. And
Oh, that's amazing. And it's Prevailing Wind is what it's called, right? And it's historical fiction.
that's right. Yeah. So
Oh,
for many years, I've been obsessed with classic sailing yachts. Go figure.
oh
That's just my thing. It's about as far from music tech as you could possibly get. But I absolutely love the days of the enormous sailing yachts owned by robber barons and plutocrats and billionaires. Around about the turn of the century, the progressive age, the New York Yacht Club, the membership of that club actually was more wealthy and powerful than the United States Treasury at that point in time.
wow. Wow.
Vanderbilts and Astors and Carnegies and all the rest of it. And their favorite pastime was racing and betting on these enormous, flimsy yachts that required 35 men to sail them. And they would
Wow.
race them out in New York Harbor and at Newport. And they would get their men, their crews, from Maine lobster ports. So you had these very isolated, often very religious communities from the east coast of Maine who would, especially in bad years for fishing, their best bet to make a living was to go and race these fancy sporting yachts owned by the New York Yacht Club. So my novel is actually written from the point of view of two brothers from Deer Isle, Maine, who get a chance to try out on a millionaire's yacht in order to compete in the 1914 America's Cup contest between the USA and England. And England would send over their challengers, and they'd have these titanic battles in New York Harbor and at Newport. And that's the background for the book.
That's amazing. I love that. So that's going to be next on my reading list. I'm so
Okay.
excited to read that.
And
So
that's coming.
it's a big switch from, this to your historical fiction book. It's
Well,
called Prevailing Wind. So
like
that's amazing.
like I said, those were stories in my memoir. Those are stories from real life that I'm telling from memory. Fiction is all about your imagination. Uh,
Exactly.
in this case, it's historical fiction, so there's a large basis in fact, and then a lot of poetic license taken by the author.
But I love that because you're very creative that way. So I'm sure that where your mind went with that historical fiction is nothing short of extraordinary. I
Well,
wouldn't put anything past you.
okay.
So clear something up because I heard a rumor. There's a rumor floating around where people don't know exactly where you were born because your father is an archaeologist. Were you born in London or were you born in Cairo?
I was born in London,
Okay.
in Charing Cross Hospital in West London. Somewhere along the lines, a publicist said to me, okay, they need to get some information from me about a bio, probably as when I'm 20, 21 years old. And they sort of said, all right, so so tell us, where were you born? London, West London. Okay. And your father, what did he do? An archaeologist. And they go, okay, well, maybe we can put two and two together actually, and just sort of jazz this up a little bit. And I want to make something of the whole Middle East thing, and your father as the archaeologist, as the sort of Indiana Jones figure. And I thought this is hilarious because he's anything but Indiana Jones. He's basically a geek like me, but his thing is Etruscan pottery, not music. So a bio came out, and it's hard to get the toothpaste back in the tube. So I later refuted this and sort of said, no, I wasn't born in Cairo, Egypt. I was born in London, England. And by that time, it was all over the internet. So, yeah.
You heard it here, born in
Heard it.
London. I didn't ask you something last time either. I'd like to know the writing process for She Blinded Me with Science. How did you come up with it, and how long did it take for you to get the entire song finished, start to finish?
So I put out my album, The Golden Age of Wireless, and it had, I think, three singles off it: Europa, Radio Silence, and Airwaves. And they got a little bit of radio play in the UK, but virtually none in the USA. And what happened during the time that album was out was that MTV started to take off. It started to get into major cities, and some bands were having hits based, on the back of getting heavy rotation on MTV. So I was friendly with the Buggles universe, and they, as you know, had one of the first big MTV hits with A Video Killed the Radio Star. My friend Bruce Woolley, who I played keyboards for a couple of years, was a co-writer on that song. So I'd seen what had happened with them, and I thought, well, I need to make music videos. I'd always fancied myself as a filmmaker, and I'd always been a huge fan of silent movie stars like Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, and so on, who very often were the sort of the underdog. They were the cute little guy that sort of evaded the bully and had no money, but brought a bunch of roses for the girl and won her heart, sort of thing. So, the underdog silent movie hero. And that was very much the mold that I saw myself in, as a performer. And so I wanted to make a silent movie with a soundtrack. But the first thing I did was create the storyboard for She Blinded Me with Science for the video. And I took the storyboard into EMI Records, my record company, and I said, I want to make this video. I need like 10 grand to go make this video, and I'm going to write and direct it myself to save you money. And they looked at me somewhat skeptically, and they said, okay, well, when do we get to hear the song? And I said, I'll bring it in on Monday morning. It's a Friday
Right, so
afternoon.
this was a Friday afternoon, and okay, you'll bring it in Monday morning. Okay.
So in terms of how long it took, it took me a weekend, basically. You
You
hear
had
from,
the storyboard for the video first.
yeah.
You had
Yeah.
this video
I
concept
had
first.
that and the title. And I had this idea of this sort of, this mad scientist character who was going to be me. And, a hot Japanese lab assistant and maybe a vintage motorcycle. And, I had an idea, a home for deranged scientists. I had all of this. But EMI's concern was that if I got sort of pigeonholed as the mad scientist type, then it'd be hard to ever get me out of that and have me sort of grow up. So we came up with the idea of what about if we hire a bona fide scientist, bona fide mad scientist, certified, to play that role, and that would make me look like the cool pop star type, right? So there's this guy that was like the BBC's equivalent when I was growing up of Bill Nye the Science Guy, right? He was the guy that went on TV and explained the galaxy or explained total eclipses or, DNA or whatever it may be for kids. And he was this mad, eccentric type, wave his arms around, had this silly voice and so on. And I found out that he was hireable by the hour or by the day. So we the budget wouldn't stretch to a day, but we got it for half a day. And yeah, we got him down to the video. I sent him a script and everything. He got on the set and he read his script, and he said, well, I'm not doing this. And I'm like, what do you mean you're not doing this? He said, well, I'm not wearing a white coat because my public don't view me as that kind of a scientist at all. I always have my suit and tie. And he was a bit of a diva, quite frankly. And when I got him to say, she blinded me with science, he said, she blinded me? with science. And I said, Dr. Pike, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement. And he said, yes, but as a known scientist, it'd be a bit surprising if the girl blinded me with science. And so that was very, he was quite full of himself. He's no longer with us, I'm afraid, but he was a funny old bird. But yeah, so it didn't matter that in the USA nobody had heard of him. He was just this sort of English eccentric, and he made me look cool.
And now he's a meme.
Yeah,
Science. He's a meme.
the last time I ever saw him alive, was in England, and he just got back from a lecture tour of the USA. And I said, "Oh, how did it go, Dr. Pike?" And he said, "Badly, Dolby." I said, "Why is that?" He said, "Every time I walk down the street, somebody would come up behind me and go, 'Science!'" Scared me out of my skin, because it would appear that your darned MTV video is more well known over there than my body of scientific work.
That is hysterical. That is an awesome, awesome story. Wow. My goodness. Some people don't know how you got the name Dolby. I know we talked about this in our last interview, but I'd just loved for you to do a quick story on how Dolby came to be, because you were not born a Dolby.
I was born Robertson, Tom Robertson. So I was in school, boarding school in the English countryside, and I was the first kid in school to get a cassette player. This would have been probably about 1970, I would guess. And in those days, cassette players, the quality was not very good, but you could pay a few extra bucks and get the Dolby button. And this removed some of the hiss from your cassette tapes. So I had this portable Philips cassette player, it was a huge thing. And I wore it with a strap over my shoulder and these hulking great headphones. And it had a Dolby button. So Dolby became my nickname. And after I left school and I went into the music business as Tom Robertson, there was also a Tom Robinson on the same sort of circuit in the UK, Tom Robinson of the TRB band. And I went backstage at one of his gigs and I said, look, we've got very similar names. People are going to get us confused. How about we do a deal that whoever has a hit first, the other one will change his name? And he agreed. And about 3 weeks later, he got in the UK charts with 2468 Motorway. So I thought, I better change my name. But Dolby was the obvious choice because that was already my nickname.
There you go. And then there was a little bit of a scuffle with but go back and watch the first interview and you'll hear the entire full story on that. Some things that people don't know, might not know about you, might not. They might, but they might not. You played synthesizer for Foreigner on songs Urgent and Waiting for a Girl Like You from 81, right? You were on Def Leppard's 83 Pyromania using the alias Booker T. Boffin.
And on
And
Hysteria.
then you did, oh, in Hysteria, you played on Belinda Carlisle's 87 Heaven is a Place on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know that. So it's very, very cool to know. Little fun facts about Professor Thomas Dolby.
Yeah.
The last time I spoke to you,
The Thompson twins as well. I
oh,
played
yes, well, probably many more.
The synth riff on In the Name of Love is me. Yeah.
There you go. You're like every little sprinkling of Dolby everywhere. The last time I talked to you, you did not have a car. And people watching, he lives here in Baltimore. You did not have a car. You used a bicycle to get around, right? Mm-hmm. But you just posted recently that you were in your Tesla traveling up Falls Road and your Tesla stopped for a family of foxes.
That's right.
So I have to ask you, you had mentioned that you were concerned that you weren't going to be able to see as much countryside of Maryland, the pretty parts, that are more rural and a little rustic with a bicycle. Is that why you ended up getting a car, or did you just realize I need a car?
We ended up getting a car during the pandemic because up till then, I'd ride my bike, when the weather's nice, but I would get Ubers or take the bus to work at Peabody, when the weather wasn't nice. And obviously during the pandemic, you couldn't do that. You couldn't take an Uber either. We just had to cave and get a car. Also, my wife, Kathleen's family are in Westchester, New York. And we used to take the train up there quite often. And again, in the pandemic, she couldn't get back to see her family. So we just caved and bought initially like a small hybrid car. But then I got very interested in electric vehicles in general. And it sort of, we wanted to buy an electric car. We were a little bit unsure about Tesla because of Mr. Musk and his mania. He's clearly a complete madman.
Mhm.
I decided that, after researching it, it's like they're so far ahead of everybody else that I really want a ringside seat. I like being part of his big experiment. I like the fact I can just let go of the car and it's like it's artificial intelligence is driving me around based on a neural network of like millions of miles, that all of the other Tesla drivers have driven. And there's good and bad things about it. Overall, I love it. But yeah, the episode with the foxes the other day was the best experience yet. We were coming back from a restaurant on Falls Road, which is in the city, but sort of a little bit woodsy because it goes alongside the highway. And we're coming down that road on a unlit bend, and the Tesla was on autopilot. It was programmed to take me home. Had my hands touching the wheel, but my foot wasn't on the pedal. And suddenly it slows down on a bend, and I'm thinking, what's going on? I'm looking around at the screen, and I see this little tiny baby fox runs out the road like the size of a kitten. Seriously, it can't have been more than a few days old. It runs out in the road, and the Tesla slowed down and stopped, and it's in the headlights, and it gave us a little look. And then four of its siblings came out, and they're all running around in the road. One of them gets like a twig in its mouth, and then they skedaddle off into the bushes, and the Tesla starts going again and drives me home.
It's
I thought
amazing.
it's just fantastic. And I thought I was so mesmerized by this, I didn't get a photo. And then I realized that the dash cam on the Tesla would have it recorded on a thumb drive. So when I got home, I pulled out a thumb drive and I put it up on YouTube and on X. And people loved it. Like silly animal videos usually get more views than my music videos do. I think my most successful video of all time was Thomas Dolby's cat pees on toilet. Um, so I put it up with something like my Tesla brakes for baby foxes. And it's very rare for me to get anything other than really nice comments, but I got some pretty rude ones because there are clearly some Tesla haters and
Oh
Musk.
yes, yes, I'm sure.
And,
I'm
and in
sure.
fact, they felt that I'd been co-opted by Elon into sort of whitewashing Tesla cars by telling this story about the baby foxes.
Yeah, but the car saved the baby foxes. Imagine if it wasn't a Tesla. Those poor little babies, right?
I think I probably would have braked, but the Tesla spotted it before I did, which
And
is
that's amazing that it records. That's crazy. I've
yeah,
never heard. Yeah. Okay. What restaurant were you at?
Kazima.
Oh, oh, good. Yeah. See, you have good taste, and they're putting a Fogo de Chao right here in Towson. Last time that I was at Fogo was with you
Oh wow, okay.
7 years ago.
Oh,
That's wild. Um, and another thing when we talked last time, you had mentioned I had told my story about how we met. We met at a Ravens game with our mutual friend Nestor. And then I started this podcast and had you on the show. And I was fangirling out, when I realized Thomas Dolby is at M&T Bank Stadium. I had no idea, right? You said go back and watch on YouTube me and David Bowie backstage at Live Aid, which I love the story of you and David Bowie in the helicopter for Live Aid. The whole thing is pretty amazing. Um, I did that. I watched that. And yes, you do have a beer in your hand and a cigarette, and you're just sitting there and you're very calm, cool, and collected. But you can tell the inner Dolby was like, it's David Bowie right next to me. I mean, yeah. So I just wanted you to know that I did watch that. It's pretty spectacular.
well, that's great. Well, I do a little tribute, sort of, in memoriam during my live show. I was lucky enough while I was rehearsing with Bowie to, I had a tape going and I had some samples of him singing unaccompanied.
Mm.
And I put together a sort of ambient tribute to that day using some samples combined with some pictures and video that I shot that day. And I performed this as part of my set. Now I'll be doing it on the Totally Tubular Tour, and there's barely a dry eye in the house. It's a very touching moment.
That's amazing. And you said, you're going to be closing out the show.
Yeah,
You're going to be closing out the show. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to see that. That's going to be incredible. You've done so much. You really have. I mean, Professor Peabody Institute at Johns Hopkins since 2014. You've scored films, producer, composer, entrepreneur. I mean, so many things with your technical equipment and creations. So I'm so glad that we did this again as a follow-up interview to talk about what you're doing now. And you had I should say in 2010, you had a map of the Floating City album out, and it did include the two guys that you were on stage with at Live Aid with David Bowie, Kevin Armstrong, and Matthew Seligman, who sadly passed in 2020, which is I'm so sorry about that.
He was one of the first COVID casualties. Actually, the first month, I think March 2020. Yeah, he succumbed to COVID. Very sad.
Horrible, absolutely horrible. But what an incredible career he had, before that, contributing to music.
He really did, and he's less known than a Bowie, a Prince, a Robbie Robertson, Dan Hicks. A lot of these are my heroes, and it's very hard to deal with life going on without the people that really inspired me. But we're the ones that are left, so we got to make the best of it.
That's true. That is very, very true. Well, Mr. Dolby, Professor Dolby, thank you for this. I want people to go and get this. I got this on Amazon, but they have it at Target and all over. You can go get it anywhere. The Speed of Sound, Thomas Dolby, Prevailing Wind, historical fiction is coming out in June.
When the Amazon page is up for that, I'll send you the link and you can add that to your site.
There you go. We can do that. That's going to be perfect. So then you can get this and read all the great stories that I've read. Oh, thank you so much for sitting with me. And I can't wait for the Totally Tubular Tour. What an incredible lineup. And I hope you're going to have a rockin' summer.
Absolutely.
You're going to have a better summer than most of us.
This summer is the 40th anniversary of my album, The Flat Earth.
Yes.
Which is astonishing, really. But I believe that BMG are actually releasing an anniversary edition of that. So hopefully, during the lifespan of this interview, hopefully there'll be a new edition of The Flat Earth will be available with some extra tracks and things like that.
Perfect. And I'm sure that you'll be able to put that on your social media when that happens, right? You want to tell people where to find you?
Oh, go to thomasdolby.com. Thomas Dolby on X, Thomas Dolby on Facebook. I'm not big into Insta. Don't really do, a bunch of the others, but yeah, easy enough to find me.
You might have to start a TikTok page for the Totally Tubular Tour. I might have to say, you got to do it.
Well, it's funny. You think it's a different demographic, but what's happening now at the shows is that people are bringing their kids. A lot of them sort of 10, 15 years ago had young kids that were being weaned on my music, but they're too young to bring to the shows. And now they're the ones dragging their parents out to come down and see the shows. So there is an influx of a younger generation, more maybe closer to the TikTok generation.
Amazing. Yep, it's true. It's trickling down. My girls are 17. They're listening to all sorts of stuff. It is trickling down. Thank you so much, Professor Dolby, for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Meredith,
Good luck on tour. I'll see you. I'll see you at the Anthem.
Absolutely.